Hello, this is Dr. Rosie Kuhn, and this podcast series is called Aging Like a Guru. I titled this particular podcast "The Paradigm Shifts in Aging," and the analogy I have when I'm thinking about aging, like when does aging start? When does the process of aging start? When do we start utilizing those elements of aging, or elements of the process of aging, or elements of maturing, or whatever that is, learning, training, being part of this element of aging? When does that start, and what does that look like really? And the intention of this particular podcast is to say, wow, I think we have to change the way that we perceive aging. In a sense, we have to create a paradigm shift in order to really make the most of this aspect, this phase of our life, this phase as aging, when we think of aging as in our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. So the analogy which came up is, when we're looking at little kids, I'm 67 now. So when I started nursery school, there was an element of learning, the process of starting to engage in social activities and, being disciplined or training, whatever that is that happens in nursery school. And then you go into kindergarten and you start learning other things, and that builds onto the next level of learning. Well, these days, children are in daycare centers or learning centers really, really, really early, as in it's never too early to begin to learn. And we never, the moment we become a conscious being, even if we're unconscious in our womb, the womb that we were gestating in before we were birthed, there's always learning going on. There's always something happening. The stimulus, the impulses, the what's true about the reality, what's true about my environment, what's true about me in this environment. It's an ongoing, ever ongoing process of us evolving into our fullest essential self. So when we're little kids, our parents are putting us in school earlier and earlier to learn to grow our mental intelligence, but that doesn't necessarily create space, like I talked about in just the previous podcast. It doesn't create how to train ourselves to be with the space of who we are inside or beyond our mental intelligence. And so quite often people are highly intelligent mentally, but they don't have emotional intelligence, or they don't have an ability to utilize intelligence outside the cognitive whatever, within the context of what they're thinking about, like a biologist or a chemist or an engineer. For me, I'm really good when I'm in the psychological or the therapeutic or the coaching mentality. But what about the intelligence of being human? How many times do I have to make a choice based on what I believe is true versus what I know to be true, the evidence of what is? And so the point of this particular podcast, I'm going to say that a few times to keep myself on track, is the intention is that in order to actually grow ourselves into the fullest expression of ourselves later in life, we need to know that that's a possibility. We have to start to cultivate the awareness of who we are earlier and earlier, I think. And so that's why I invite people of all ages to listen to these podcasts and to engage with themselves and be curious about who they are as they're imagining themselves to be aging. A client of mine, Marcy, she when she retired from work, she was able to she was able to have the space to be in her garden, where she just felt so much herself. So she created and spends a lot of time in her garden. That's where she finds fulfillment of her human spirit. That's where she has a sense of who she is. And so many people find themselves once they've let go of the current paradigm of working and struggling and making a living and sort of what we consider to be the survival needs. And that's, it's a part of who we are. in our survival needs. We're human beings and we need to survive. But so much of our life is spent trying to survive when there really isn't any need for focus on such survival. That's the difference between intelligence and belief, and the fear elements of what we've been trained, or how we've been trained to see the world and see ourselves in the world. So as we grow older, quite often people will begin to cultivate interests and cultivate and expand themselves in ways they never even imagined. I imagine being, when I was even in my 20s or 30s, that getting old meant basically, again, encroaching decrepitude, that little by little you just keep getting worse and worse and smaller, and saggier and saggier, and you just become less, period. And so my reality didn't focus on who I was becoming. It was just that my identity, I was focusing on my identity, who I was as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a partner, as a teacher, as a coach. But who I am inside of all of that, I've begun changing. I've been in the process of changing that as I've been doing these podcasts. We're coming up to, this is actually the 50th podcast, even though it's number 149 because there was an introduction. But as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that the person inside these aging bodies has so much extraordinariness in our potentiality, the potentiality. Even when we're 98 years old, we have so much extraordinary potentiality there, and yet we don't see it. And we don't see it because our current paradigm looks at aging as, again, encroaching decrepitude, senility, dementia. What's the value of this being if they can't be productive? And that's a huge political issue for people who are in the politics of aging. It's a huge emotional issue for those who are in that state and are seen as so much as less than, and the quality of their life is diminished because they've been trained to think less of themselves, and the people around them think less of themselves. So the point, I think, of these podcasts, Aging Like a Guru, is that we have to begin to do a paradigm shift. We have to begin to think differently than the way that we've been trained to think. Einstein said, problems are, the problems that we create most of them in the context of consensus reality. Fear is a great fear, and money. We could talk about that another time, but those create a lot of problems for people. And so he says we have to solve the problems. The problems will solve themselves, in a sense, if we create a different paradigm. And that paradigm is, in a sense, based on spiritual principles, or based on principles of fearlessness, not fear. And so as we age, we can grow into fear, which generally leads us to grow into depression and worry, and we start to become more reclusive as opposed to being more open and sharing. So as we begin, there's a lot of words, a lot of places. I hope this is going someplace for you. But the willingness to see which paradigm am I living in? Am I living in the paradigm of, I'm going to get old and decrepitude, and I'm going to have less to offer and less to give and less to be? Or are you able or willing to consider growing the potential of seeing yourself as always the fullest potential of you every day, and growing your potential of that within this human being is this amazing, extraordinary, energetic spirit self that has something very, very important to do. I have that in air quotes, to be in this moment, whether you're 99 or 107 or 62, that you have this extraordinary moment to be in and to live in, and to be willing to consider and be curious about what that other paradigm is. That's a good thing. Because once you begin to consider that, then you're opening yourself up to a different reality. There, a long time ago, there was a comedy group, and one of the things you probably heard it, it's called you ask, what is reality? It's like, what is reality? How did it get to be this way? Somebody made it up. Somebody made it up. And you have the capacity to make it up different, to support and empower you to be you and your greatest potential. All right. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes you curious about you, and big hugs to you all. If you're interested, I'd love you to join me on Facebook page, Aging Like a Guru. Leave comments or connections or questions there. If you'd like to be interviewed for this show, I'd love to hear from you too. You can email me at rosie@theparadigmshifts.com. If you're interested in getting some coaching or training or hearing more about what I offer, you can email me, rosie@theparadigmshifts.com, or check out my website, theparadigmshifts.com. All right. Big hugs. Bye for now.